Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai. Let's get set up here real quick. Thread. It's recording, Prabhu? Hare Krishna. The title of the class is Wearing Pants on the Vyasasana, a blasphemous deviation or a bona fide model backed up by history and scripture. Let's find out. Or let's find out my presentation on it, which I hope is in line with the conclusion of our theology. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So we're reading from Sri Caitanya-caritāmṛta and we're reading the Madhya-līlā, chapter 20, verse 72, the starting of the discussion between Lord Chaitanya and Sanatana Goswami, having to do with Sanatana Goswami's Gucci Chadar. If you're familiar with the story of this passage, Sanatana Goswami had a chadar, or had a woolen blanket, which Lord Chaitanya didn't like so much because it was too Gucci. It was too, to use a modern word, it was too opulent. So this is the story that we're right in the middle of it. And so it has to do with clothes, it has to do with dressing. And therefore, we're supposed to speak on the verse at hand and not use the Vyasasana to, speak on some other topic. But here, the topic really is dressing. And since I'm fascinated by the topic of dressing, and I've researched the topic pretty much in depth since 2008, 2009. I thank Krishna, I thank Nishingadev, and I thank your patience for an opportunity to speak a little in depth about this topic, on the topic of, specifically, like, how should a devotee dress? So here we are, verse 72. So please repeat after me. Madhya-līlā Prabhu gela bhiksha karibare. Sanatane lana gela tapana mishrera gare. Uh-oh, this one's in German, Prabhu. Fortunately, the Bengali is the same. Thank you. Madhya-līlā Prabhu gela bhiksha karibare. Sanatane lana gela tapana mishrera gare. Madhya-līlā Prabhu gela bhiksha karibare. Sanatane lana gela tapana mishrera gare. You read German, Prabhu? You want to read? Oh, it's also German. No, but okay. Well, thank you, Prabhu. We have it here. So here's the translation. Prabhu, the translation. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Please. Yeah. Please repeat. Yeah. I'm sorry. Please. Vaishnavis? Any other Prabhus or Vaishnavis or other forms of life that can somehow recite classical Bengali? Okay, so word for word. Madhya-līlā, finishing bathing at noon. Prabhu, Sri Chaitanya. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Gela, went. Bhiksha karibare, to accept lunch. Sanatane, Sanatan Goswami. Lanya, taking. Gela, went. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Gela went. Tapana Mishrera Ghare, to the house of Tapan Mishra. So translation by Srila Prabhupada. After bathing at noon, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to the house of Tapan Mishra for lunch. He took Sanatan Goswami with him. And Sanatan Goswami had just arrived, right? Right. Prabhu? Yes, he arrived from a long distance, and he had a beard, he had a mustache, he had long, dirty hair, and he was dressed in dirty clothes. And Candrashekara Acarya was sent by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to go. He was outside the door. I said, "Go see him." It's stated. Go see. There's a Vaishnava, and he went there and he couldn't recognize him. I said, "No, he's there." So he comes in, and there's this whole lila where the Lord tells Sanatana Goswami to get shaved up, to get clean. And he does so. And at one point, but Sanatana Goswami is very renounced. See, the context of this is extreme renunciation. Like extreme renunciation. Sannyas to the level where, like, even a used dhoti is maya. It's true. Like, they give him a clean dhoti, and he's like, no, and he takes a used dhoti and he rips it in half, so he could, he rips it in half to make two garments for himself. So that's the context we're talking in, right? That's the context we're talking in. So we'll go back to the pastime a little bit. There's no purport, so the devotee who because there's not a purport for at least 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 verses, and also Ramananda Prabhu spoke about the next verses that come also. He spoke about Madhukari, how Sanatana Goswami and the sannyasis around Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would literally go begging like mendicants, and the term is used Madhukari, which means like a bee that collects a little bit. Remember last week, Ramananda Prabhu spoke about that? A bee that goes from one flower to another and collects a little bit here and there. So that's the context. And the key, let's say the key event in this pastime is, because I'm not going to get to it here, the next week, the next devotee is going to get to it. So then Lord Chaitanya sees this Gucci chadar, or this expensive chadar, which is not appropriate for hardcore renunciates, as the group of renunciates that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is heading. And Lord Chaitanya just looks at his chadar a few times, Kaviraj Goswami says. And then Sanatana Goswami understands, the Lord doesn't like this, it's too opulent. So he goes to the bank of the river, and then there's a poor man there with a torn quilt, with like a sort of a blanket that's made up of different stitched cloths together. And Sanatana Goswami says, "Here, let's exchange, please." And the man feels offended, like, why are you joking with me? Why are you making fun of me? It's like, no, please exchange it. Why? This is a nice blanket. Why would I give you my old torn quilt? And he insists, no, please. He says, you're not joking? No. Okay. So they exchange. And then Sanatana Goswami goes back to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very, very happy. He's very, very happy. And he says, this is the key verse. He says, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, a few verses from here. Since Lord Krishna is very merciful, he has nullified your attachment for material things. Why should Krishna allow you to maintain a last bit of material attachment? It is contradictory to practice Madhukari and at the same time wear a valuable blanket. By his desire, so Sanatana Goswami says, by his desire, by Krishna's desire, my last piece of material attraction, a woolen blanket, is now gone. Is now gone. So, let me tell you briefly how I got to become fascinated with this topic of dress code. We're supposed to speak from personal experience, so when I graduated out of the Brahmachari ashram, when I was almost out of the Brahmachari ashram, one of my old friends who had been in the Brahmachari ashram with me in Los Angeles, Janaki Ram Prabhu, went to university in Santa Barbara, and he sent me a quote from Prabhupada. And that quote is from 1977, from 1977, where Prabhupada says, listen to this, "No, dhoti, I don't say. You have nice coat, pant. I don't say that you have to. I never said that. You have adopted it. I never said you put on dhoti. So when I read that quote, I was like, what? What is this? Like, no way. And so that's when, I got this interest to study everything that Prabhupada said on the topic of dressing. Around that time, I also went back to university to study religion at the same university in Santa Barbara, University of California in Santa Barbara. And there, for the first time in my life, I was taking a step sort of back from Krishna consciousness, not in terms of my practice, but in terms of, analyzing Gaudiya Vaishnavism as, an anthropologist or as a sociologist or as a historian, And then I was also looking at other religions of the world, Christianity, other branches of Hinduism, Sikhism, Islam, ancient Christianity, modern Christianity. And so for me, it was just like, putting all these things together and having all these extra elements to compare my own tradition, right? With a, one step inside and one step out. And I really was fascinated by this topic of dress. I looked at different world religions, and I looked, okay, what's the model? What's the basic dress code model? And how does Krishna consciousness, how does Gaudiya Vaishnavism, our tradition, compare? Which model does Gaudiya Vaishnavism resemble the most? So, you've got one model where the priest has a uniform, and everyone in the community and the congregation also has a uniform. Like the Hasidic Jews, the Sikhs. Actually, Sikhs is after Guru Gobind Singh, because the first 200 years of Sikhism, there was no uniform, but this came later. Some, Sikhs, Hasidic Jews, the Mennonites, the Amish, in Pennsylvania, in America, you see these guys with beards and hats, Then there's another model where the priests have a uniform, but the congregation is dressed like everybody else in society. Best example, the Catholic Church, right? Then you have a model where, the priest doesn't have a uniform, and the congregation also doesn't have a uniform. And that you see a lot in Protestant Christian movements, right? At least when they're giving the sermon, with the Bible in their hand, they dress exactly like the person in front. And we could almost argue the Brahmins in India, regardless of their tradition, also kind of have a no uniform. The dhoti that they put on to go on the altar is the same dhoti they have when they're speaking from the Vyasasana, and it's the same dhoti they wear at home playing with their children. Interesting. So then I was like, okay, so what is, let's look at the history of our tradition. Let's look at, what does the Bhagavatam say? And what does Prabhupada say? And what really got me into this study was, I went to one picnic program in Los Angeles, where Hridayananda Goswami, one of my dear Shiksha gurus, was giving, a class. And there was one sentence he made that I was like, oh my God, kind of similar to that, letter from Janaki Ram from Prabhupada that he had sent me. He made this really interesting point. It's a simple point, but to me it was just like, whoa, I never thought about it that way. He said, there is no historical evidence that anyone who joined Lord Chaitanya in his Sankirtan movement had to change the way they dressed, right? And to me, I was like, wow, this was like such a mind blower. And that's how I got into studying. And since 2009, basically, I've just been studying all these, quotes. And I decided that, okay, you know what? I'm not a monk anymore. I'm not a brahmachari anymore. I'm not living in a monastery. And, after studying all these quotes from Prabhupada, which we're going to go through, and by the way, if we finish a little late, please feel free to go have prasadam. I just thought, okay, I have one opportunity to put everything in there. So I'm going to have all these different quotes. Really interesting. I'll tell you what we'll do. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to shift dress. And And I was doing it consciously, you know. But then I experienced a lot of criticism. You know, I remember we went to the Kirtan Mela in Germany in 2010, the first Kirtan Mela, and then my friend Paramshraya Prabhu was telling me, some devotees are saying, what's wrong with, you know, did Chandrashekar fall down? What's wrong with Chandrashekar, you know? And anyway, it hurt, and, you know, I still experience it. But I remember also I went to the Serbian festival, the summer festival, maybe 2010, 2011. And Sachinandan Swami, after a kirtan on the second day or something, everyone has just finished the kirtan, and he called me. He said, Chandrashekar. So I came, and I had the chance to associate with him and in different places, and I knew him. You know, we had a relationship, a small one, but a relationship nonetheless. And he said, Chandrashekar, I see that you are dressed differently now than you were dressed before. And he says, I know that there must be some thinking behind this. And I want to know what is this thinking. I want to know what is this thinking. So we will meet tomorrow, and you will tell me what is this thinking of yours. And I was in ecstasy, because I felt like, wow, for the first time, you know, in a couple of years, I'm getting validation from a leader who seems to understand that I'm doing this strategically and, you know, with justification in Shastra. So the next day we met and we spoke, and I'll always remember he told me, Chandrashekar, we are on the same page. And I remember he said, you know, Chandrashekar, the Hare Krishnas, we are like the tiger in the zoo. Many people like the tiger, but they don't want to go too close to the tiger on the other side of the fence. and then he said something that, you know, I don't like to say publicly because it puts light on me, but I think I'm doing, I'm saying this because he said it, and because I think it represents a lot of devotees who are, you know, thinking in similar terms. So Chandrashekar, I'm very happy that we have such forward thinkers as you in our movement. So listen, my intention here is not to argue against the wearing of saris and dhotis, all right? That's not my intention is not to do a dhoti bashing class, right? That what is better, which one or the other. The majority of devotees in ISKCON today, they like to wear dhotis and saris, and that's perfectly okay and glorious, and I have no issue whatsoever with that, just to be clear. But like I said, it's also an observable fact that there's a growing community worldwide of devotees, men and women, who feel comfortable practicing strict sadhana in local Western clothes, and who also want to represent Krishna consciousness in those same clothes, right? And so my argument is that that model is justified in scripture, in history, and in Prabhupada's statements. And therefore, in a place like a temple room, it's justified. Now, before continuing, I want to talk about this principle of water seeking its own level. Who knows what this means, that this expression, water seeks its own level? What does it mean, Bashar Prabhu? Water is always looking at the lowest possible place where gravity is pushing it down, you know? Like if you put water higher, then it's always going to try to find where is my, natural level. And so I mention this because imagine the Shastric rules as the parameter of a container, right? With different levels inside. If you pour water, the water will go down to the lowest possible denominator that is within the parameters of what's allowed in Shastra, right? And we see that, devotees naturally go towards the place where water seeks its own level. For example, in the early days of the movement, there was this strong preaching, brahmacharya, men should remain should remain single, should not marry, right? And there was a strong push to remain brahmacharya. Prabhupada himself stressed, this brahmacharya. But our shastras allow marriage. And therefore, water seeks its own level. And we see that the majority of men of that first generation got married, right? In spite of, social pressure to remain brahmacharis. So similarly, I think this model of wearing normal Western clothes in one's context is similar to that. And with time, I think, and we're seeing more and more devotees are like, okay, I can also do that and still be very Krishna conscious. Oh, I'm going to do it, I want to make a distinction between monks and non-monks. That's important. There's monks who live in temples, like sannyasis, brahmacharis, and then there's the large majority today. Back in the 70s, it was like non-existent, But now in 2022, the largest majority of practicing devotees are financially independent householders. That's an important distinction to make. And I also want to make a distinction between what goes on right on the altar, which is called pancharatrika. Deity worship, where you're actually touching the deity of the Lord and offering articles to the deity on the altar. That's called the pancharatrika path. And then what happens in the temple room or in the streets or, basically in the temple room or in the streets or in your living room, as long as you're not actually worshiping the deity, that's called Bhagavat Marg, the path of hearing and chanting. And those are two different paths that have, they're parallel, but they have different rules for each one. Shingadev ki jai. Now, is this important for us, this topic of dress code? Or how is it important? Sometimes we hear like, this is not important, come on, First of all, we all communicate non-verbally, right? We can't escape it, even if we put, if we would go naked. Like Shukadeva Goswami, who was sitting on the Vyasasana naked. We're definitely giving a message. So we can't avoid giving a message to the world by the way we dress, right? This non-verbal communication is obligatory, so that's something we all do. And as members of ISKCON, or as members of ISKCON, our message is in relationship to preaching, to, what do we stand for? What is our theology? What is our lifestyle? What does it mean to be a Vaishnava, right? And therefore, because it's preaching, we could say it's most important. The topic, how do we dress? That topic is directly related with communicating with conditioned souls. And communicating with conditioned souls is the life and soul of Lord Nityananda, right? Lord Nityananda's mood and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mood is just to give Krishna consciousness to others, to interact with other souls who are maybe more conditioned than us, and how we can convince them about Krishna consciousness. Therefore, it's our duty to know as many topics as we can in ISKCON, especially if we're members of ISKCON. It's our responsibility towards our founder Acarya, towards Krishna, towards Lord Chaitanya, to be in the knowledge of a particular topic, right? And in particular, today as we're seeing with Sanatana Goswami, the topic of dressing and how that relates to, Yukta Vairagya and, renunciation, false renunciation. How does renunciation relate to dressing? How does dressing relate to renunciation? What is real renunciation? And that topic, let me give you one quote from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. In his commentary to 11.7.12, he says that knowledge of false renunciation and real renunciation, or the topic of renunciation, is and this is what he says, they're confidential purports of Srimad Bhagavatam meant for the understanding of fortunate living entities. So it's important. So it's important for us. It's a topic that we, should know about. So now I'm just going to present to you a lot of references. A lot of references. And I love these references, and they're great references from Prabhupada. We're going to do a whole chronology of Prabhupada. We're going to cover different topics like Yukta Vairagya, time, place, and circumstance. What did Prabhupada say about sannyasis? What does the Bhagavatam say about dress? What does, Lord Chaitanya say about dress? But we could summarize it, I think, in one statement by Prabhupada in 1968 where he says, especially about, the temple room, householders may wear dhotis in the temple or as they like. Or as they like. Actually, I wanted to stop the class right there and just kind of joke. Okay, any questions now? Okay, bye. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Goodbye. So let's go back to Sanatana Goswami. Sanatana Goswami has just been told by the glance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that's too opulent. He's wearing nothing almost, and he has a wool chadar, a blanket, and Mahaprabhu's like, Right? Question, why did Lord Chaitanya not say this to, for example, Pundarik Vidyanidhi, or Ramananda Roy, or King Prataparudra? These three that I just mentioned are householders, and two of them are very rich. And you don't see at all Chaitanya Mahaprabhu telling them like, hey, shave your head. You don't see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu telling them, hey, a wool blanket is too opulent, right? So a possible answer for that is that Grihastha Vaishnavas, they have the adhikar, it's a Sanskrit term for prerogative. They have the qualification, they have the prerogative, the qualification to dress however they want, as long as they follow, basic principles of the mode of goodness. If there's one principle, like sort of a universal principle that applies to everybody in Vaishnavism, it's Sattvaguna. In the Jaiva Dharma, chapter 9, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, quote, the only requirement for clothing is that you should cover the body and be clean and free from unpleasant odors. So in one way, using this quote, we could claim that, hey, you're in the mode of goodness. That's what's important. Especially if you're not a monk. Monks have their uniform, and there are quotes for that. Now, someone may say, well, the only way to dress in the mode of goodness is to wear saris and dhotis, right? We hear that sometimes. Western clothes are, by definition, passionate and tamasic. But that's not what seems that Prabhupada thought. It doesn't seem to be what Prabhupada thought. At least in one occasion in Hawaii in 1974, Prabhupada, listen to this. He says, one has to transcend even the quality of so-called goodness. Actually, there is no goodness. Here, so this is 74, Hawaii. Okay, nobody's wearing dhotis except for a few Hare Krishnas in the ISKCON temple in Hawaii in 1974. Here, people dress in the platform of goodness, but thinking just like animals. That kind of goodness has no value. So we're seeing that Prabhupada is accepting the premise that you can dress in the mode of goodness externally, be dressed in clean, clothes, gentlemen, without odors, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, and yet your consciousness can be completely materialistic. right? But at least it's established here that the way to dress in mode of goodness is not only by wearing a sari or a dhoti. And that's important to remember, I think. A little clarification or elaboration on this thing of Pancharatrika and Bhagavat Marg, right? As I said, Pancharatrika is what happens on the altar. There's a few statements in scripture about not wearing stitched clothes on the altar, that come from Hari Bhakti Vilas. And that's what happens on the altar. Prabhupada himself didn't follow that rules, but that's another topic. But that's Pancharatrika. For Bhagavat Marg, we're talking everything off the altar, as I said. And for that, and what happens off the altar? Shravanam Kirtanam. Hearing and chanting. I mean, it even goes on the altar also, but off the altar, that's the main thing we're doing. We're hearing about chanting and we're chanting about Krishna. I mean, we're hearing about Krishna and we're chanting about Krishna, right? And here, let me give you two references for that, general references. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in his Shikshashtakam, what does he say? That there are no hard and fast rules for chanting the holy name. And you know, in the verse by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, Satatam Kirtayanto Mam, where Krishna says, you know, the great souls, they are always in kirtan. They're always doing kirtan. Satatam Kirtayanto Mam, about me. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, one of our great acharyas, mentions in his commentary to that verse that the word Satatam means no restriction of time, place, and circumstance. Right? No restrictions. And I come back to this example all the time because it's really the extreme example. Shukadeva Goswami. He's chanting Krishna's glories to dying King Parikshit, and he's naked. He's naked. Think about that. Right? The speaker of our main scripture is naked. Now, before going to further quotes about clothes, I want to do a little parenthesis about hair. Because devotees, you know, we like to know, okay, well, you know, should, like men, for example, should I shave my head or not? You know, should I have a shika or not? I have a friend who's, I don't want to mention his name, he's getting married next week. And he's like, should I wear a shika or should I not wear a shika? You know, so that's a question that many devotees have, right? And there's different quotes on it from Prabhupada's statements. There's these famous quotes from, you know, early 67, 68, 66, and also later on, to be fair, where Prabhupada puts emphasis on what he calls the flag, right? Devotees should have shaved head and the flag, the shika. And so some devotees just take those statements. Oh, that's it, the flag. Every devotee must have, you know, every male devotee should have the flag, the shaved head and the flag. But there's nuances. There's other statements from Prabhupada, if you actually look it up, where he doesn't emphasize that. And who does he emphasize it for, and who does he not emphasize it for? Monks or grihastas? That's a super important thing that we always come back to. Monks is something, grihastas is a different thing. So for example, in 1971, Prabhupada says, regarding a painting or a painting that someone's painting, and he says, yes, occasionally devotees may be pictured, this is male devotees, occasionally male devotees may be pictured with full head of hair instead of shika. You should use your own discretion. And then speaking of clothes, he says the garb, the dress can be Vedic or American. There is no harm. Dress has nothing to do with the soul. Prabhupada was sent a photograph of Balavanta Prabhu, American disciple of his, who in the mid-1970s was running for political office. They had a political party called the In God We Trust Party. And Prabhupada was aware. Did you heard of that? The In God We Trust party? Like during Prabhupada's time, there was some small effort to, start the first Vaishnava political party. And Satsarup Maharaj tells in one of his books that when Prabhupada received a photograph of Balavanta Prabhu speaking at a political rally in suit and tie, and his hair was grown out, and he had tilak, Prabhupada said, this is what I always wanted, that we be known as American Krishnas. Another reference, our dear Ambarish Prabhu, Temple of the Vedic Planetarium main donor, great-grandson of Alfred Ford, who was one of the only financially independent householders in the 1970s, right? Here's a picture of him getting initiation from Prabhupada. He's getting his initiation, he's getting his beads in Hawaii, and look at his hair. He has what Prabhupada says, a full set of hair, or however he calls it, right? Because he's not a monk, he never lived in a temple, he's living as a grihastha. Prabhupada's like, look at Prabhupada's face, giving him the beads. Prabhupada doesn't seem to, could not seem more happy, right? To finish up on the hair thing, Hari Shori Prabhu, in his book Transcendental Diary, he tells a story that took place in Germany actually once. And he mentions that during an initiation ceremony, all the men were getting ready to receive their beads, and they were all shaved except 2 men who had grown hair. And Prabhupada, according to Hari Shori, said, why are they not shaved? Hari Shori went to the devotees, asked them, and Hari Shori came back to Prabhupada and told Prabhupada, they said that they have jobs, they are working. And Prabhupada immediately changed and said, that is fine. Now those cases of devotees getting initiated who have jobs outside were not literally but practically non-existent. Super important point. The membership of ISKCON in the 1970s was practically all monks and nuns. And the few couples that existed, they lived in temples like nuns and monks. You can ask, Akila Prabhu, you can ask any of those devotees who lived through those 70s. Devotees who lived, quote unquote, outside the temples, financially independent, were very rare. Right? So, again, like the flag statement by Prabhupada seems to relate to ashram devotees, to temple devotees, meaning monks and nuns. Now, should a temple president of ISKCON, who's married, have a shaved head and a shika? Or can a temple president who's married wear Western clothes? And that's a really interesting topic. It's kind of like, the word in German, liminal? Liminal means like you're 1 foot here. It's like you can be in 2 situations in one principle. Liminal, you're neither here, neither there, Yeah, inside, outside. So the position of how a temple president, a married householder temple president should dress to represent ISKCON is a liminal, interesting, arena of exploration. But you see, we have to be really careful when looking at Prabhupada's statements, because many times, first of all, we have to remember the context, 1970s, monastic movement, practically, different from today, which is 99% householders who live, financially independent. And remembering this, you have to look at Prabhupada's statements, and many times you'll see Prabhupada will fuse 2 concepts with 1 word, and creating a little bit of confusion if we don't look carefully. For example, many times Prabhupada says, the students of the Krishna consciousness movement, right? Or the members of the Krishna consciousness movement. So we read this today in 2022 and we think, oh, okay, that means, any member of ISKCON who's chanting and who accepts Prabhupada and who lives at home. But in the same paragraph, or in the same sentence, Prabhupada adds the word saffron. Prabhupada adds the word sannyasi. Prabhupada adds the words brahmachari. Prabhupada adds the word live with us. To live with us, meaning to live in the ashram. For example, in 1974, Prabhupada says, according to Shastra, anyone who wears tilak and shika and kunti over and above the Vaishnava dress, so right there you would think, oh, there is such a thing as a Vaishnava dress, and you have to have a shika. But in the same sentence, Prabhupada says Vaishnava dress or Vaishnav sannyasi must be accepted. Right? So in one sentence, Prabhupada makes a general statement, the members of the Krishna consciousness movement, but then he qualifies, sannyasis. Right? So it's not everybody. When Prabhupada talks about my boys and girls, sometimes, he really saw them as renunciates, kind of like almost like the Lord Chaitanya, the Sanatana Goswami type. I mean, look at this letter. Letter 1973, Bombay. Main thing is that these boys and girls have understood what is austerity and the difference between spirit and matter. That is the highest knowledge of existence. Because they are engaged in serving Krishna in this way, you have nothing further to worry. Their position in life is very secure and sound because they are going back home, back to Godhead without any doubt. And listen to this. Though they may be dressed in rags, still they are more exalted than kings. So, dressed in rags is exactly what we've just read right here in Sanatana Goswami's dress. He literally exchanges his woolen blanket for rags. And who is Sanatana Goswami? Or what category of ashram is Sanatana Goswami in? Grihastha? Hardcore renunciation. Speaking of devotees in some Arabic country, Prabhupada says the Mohammedans will have a difficult time shaving their beard in one sentence. And he says, if anyone with long hair or a beard wants to join this Krishna consciousness movement, so here you think, okay, today when we join, what does it mean today? You're joining the Krishna consciousness movement, but probably you won't live as a monk in an ashram. You have your life, independent, right? I mean, maybe you're going to be a brahmachari tomorrow and whatever, but most people who join ISKCON today join by adopting Krishna in their own life, correct? But back then, the Krishna consciousness movement meant you live in the temple as a monk. And here in that same sentence again, look at this. If anyone with long hair or beard wants to join this Krishna consciousness movement and live with us, he must similarly shave his head clean. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had a shaved head. Did he have hair when he was a grihastha? Did he even have long hair when he was a grihastha? Yeah. Now, is there any way that Prabhupada would not like or would criticize anything that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did? Is that at all possible? Not possible, right? Listen to this. Prabhupada says, the followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu consider long hair objectionable. The followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu consider that long hair is not good. So here we have to say, okay, what does Prabhupada mean when he says the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? The only way to explain this statement is to specify the brahmachari or the sannyasi followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They shave their head, and therefore they don't like long hair for sannyasis. Right? We could easily argue that. Otherwise, how do you explain, if it applies to, grihastas, how do you explain Prabhupada saying the followers, so including, all followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, consider long hair objectionable. It's indirectly saying it is objectionable. The example that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu set is objectionable. Mamma mia. So that's closed on the hair. Tilak and Tulsi. There seems to be many quotes in Shastra that Tilak and Tulsi, especially Tilak, really is, as Prabhupada says, our position. Right? If there's any sort of external symbol that really represents Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we can find many references claiming that it's actually Tilak, and in some cases Tulsi. Right? For example, in Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada summarizes Rupa Goswami, and as you know, Rupa Goswami mentions three very important principles, the most three important principles of Bhakti Yoga. And there's two other ones which are also very important, so like top 5 most important. Then he lists 10 very, very important principles. And then he quotes another 10. And finally, there's 44 other ones. The math is 65. There's 65 items of devotional service. He says exactly this. Listen, there's 10 primary regulative principles, of which 3 are the most important. Then secondary 10 regulative principles. Then 44 other activities. Nowhere in these 65 items is dress mentioned even once. Tulsi is not mentioned. Tilak is mentioned. What number? Guess, Prabhus. Tilak. No, not number 1. Number 1 is accepting a spiritual master, approaching a spiritual master. 21st item, Prabhus. 21st. So it's not in the top 10 most important. It's not in the secondary top 10. It's the first one out of the extra 44 other activities. Right? Lochandas Thakur, in his Chaitanya Mangal, he has this beautiful song, right, called Nitai Gora Nam. And he says, those who never wear neck beads take their permanent residence in the abode of Yamaraj. And those who never adorn their foreheads with tilak live their lives in vain. Right? And like I said, there's many quotes where Prabhupada stresses the tilak. Okay, you can dress however you want, but tilak must be there. Like in 77 in March, he says, tilak is our position. But even tilak sometimes can be adjusted. In Prema Pradip by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he quotes this. This is a story, a dialogue between Naren Babu and Anand Babu, and they ask Babaji, Prabhu, shall we mark our forehead with tilak? And Babaji answers, do as you like, I don't insist on external formalities. Let's talk about how sannyasis in ISKCON should dress. Prabhupada insisted, it seems from all that you see, that sannyasis should have a uniform and should have shaved head. I mean, you see the example of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu here with Sanatana Goswami, But in special cases, Prabhupada was okay, it seems. For example, the Bhaktivedanta Institute, the scientific branch of ISKCON, which was led by a team including a sannyasi called Bhakti-swarup Damodar Maharaj, right? Sripad Maharaj, who passed away 5-6 years ago. And he's from India, actually. He's from Manipur. And for example, there's this conversation in 1977 in Bombay where Prabhupada says, now it is fashion, this shaved head, but if you think it is impediment, you can have hair. So he's speaking to a sannyasi. What to speak of grihastas? He's speaking to a sannyasi, and Swarup Damodar, who's a sannyasi at that time. In 77, Swarup Damodar Maharaj is already a sannyasi. He says, in India it is all right, but in the West, especially in the United States, Prabhupada says, then keep your hair. I have no objection. That should not be an impediment, whatever you determined, you see. And then again he says, the tilak, but the tilak we can always have, Prabhupada says. Right? You belong to Hare Krishna, that should be there, that cannot be missing. Prabhupada himself, speaking about his own self as a sannyasi, said in 1969 to Gopal Krishna, who then became a sannyasi, but at that time he was a grihasta. He says, regarding dress, I have already written to you that you can dress as smartly as possible to deal with the public, and dress is immaterial in Krishna consciousness. Consciousness is within. And then he says this, I am a sannyasi, but if some important work requires I dress myself just like a smart gentleman, I would immediately accept it. And we see those sannyasis who did adjust as sannyasis in some circumstances, did fantastic pioneering work. Tamal Krishna Maharaj in China. He went there, dressed in suit and tie. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, when he went to Russia, he was dressed, it's amazing, because Bhakti Tirtha Swami was able to distribute books at universities and preach like crazy in the early days of the Iron Curtain in Russia, when there was no black people in Russia. And he was still able to, can you imagine like being white in Russia in those days as a devotee is hard to hide your identity. He was black and still he was able to hide his identity. This is miraculous. And when he went to Africa, he would dress, you see pictures of him like dressed as an African tribe king, And he was criticized for that. But Prabhupada says, the higher principle is to adjust for time, place, and circumstance. Right? But when they go home to their ashram, or when they go home to a temple or to a monastery, or when they speak in a place where they don't have to necessarily adjust, then yeah, it seems like Prabhupada and our tradition, at least in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I say in our tradition up to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because in the Bhagavatam, nothing's mentioned about sannyasis, how they should dress. Shukadeva Goswami, most renounced, he's naked. But at least from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's line, sannyasis have a uniform, saffron, and Prabhupada, stressing that. And so sannyasis today, when they're not preaching in some, China or Saudi Arabia or, then yeah, it seems like they should have a uniform. But again, the grihastas, what about them? So now for the next maybe 10 minutes, the best part of the class for me, I love these quotes. A chronology of what I call the come as you are quotes from Prabhupada. After all, we're in ISKCON, so we love Prabhupada and we want to see what did Prabhupada say. And I make this claim, I believe I'm a fallen soul, so this has nothing to do with my level of consciousness or purity in Krishna consciousness, but the Veda-based program only came in 2003, where you could actually start, pointing keywords in everything that was recording from Prabhupada. So prior to 2003, unless you lived with Prabhupada all the time, 24 hours a day, and you read all his letters and you listened to all his conversation, you had no way to hear and see everything he said, right? These quotes I got from the Veda base, and goes from 66 to 77. So sit back, relax, and I hope enjoy the quotes. In 66, Prabhupada says, after hearing Bhagavad Gita, you will remain in the same position. Not that after hearing this Bhagavad Gita, as you have kindly come here, you will have to take a dress like me and give up your family connections and become a mendicant like me. No. It is not meant like that. You have to change your mentality. That's all. October 1967. If somebody dresses like nice American gentlemen without any robes, I have no objection. August 1966. If our purpose is Krishna consciousness, either I dress myself in this orange color, or either you dress in coat, pant, and shirt, oh, there is no difference. There is no difference because the aim is the same. Everyone combinedly. We have formed a society to work combinedly. Oh, there is no restriction that only these orange-colored sannyasis will be allowed and not the man in coat pants. He's making this distinction, not, sannyasis in orange and Prabhus in white. He's saying sannyasis in orange and this man in coat pant. No, that is not the purpose. If the purpose is that we have come to become Krishna conscious, we have to work together in Krishna consciousness. There is no question of changing the dress. Neither you don't have to renounce your present situation. This present situation is super, super important. And I'll come back to it when we go to the Bhagavatam verses. The present situation. We find this in the Bhagavatam, this notion of remaining in your established situation. Stane stitaha, 10.14.3. Remaining in one's established situation. You see, Prabhupada is repeating the Bhagavatam here in his own words. The Grihastas, those who are in their own established situation, he says your present position, you don't have to change the dress. So, dressing is very much connected to being in your situation that you're in your social life, when you're not living in a temple as a monk. 1968, an interview in Los Angeles, someone asks, what is the purpose of these robes? Prabhupada says, a brahmachari should dress like that. Our dress is saffron dress. Our dress. So you would think, our means, all the men in Krishna consciousness, because our means everybody. But he says saffron. But who wears saffron? Brahmacharis and sannyasis. Our dress is saffron dress. This dress is not, but even that is not important thing. And he says this, anyone who does not want to change this dress, that does not matter. We do not insist. These brahmacharis, they voluntarily change. Just like Tejas is going to voluntarily change into saffron dress in a few weeks. No one's telling you to do it. You're voluntarily doing it because you're going to become a brahmachari, a monk. Right? But otherwise, there are many students, like maybe you're a working man, but you could fall into the category of student. There are many students, just like we have got 2-3 students. They are working. They come just like ordinary American gentlemen. Or German, yes. Jawohl. And so then the question is, okay, they come to do what? Do they come to just give a donation in the hundi box and sit in the back of the room? And then the temple devotees will tell them what to do? Or do we pray and hope, like Srivas Thakur prays in Chaitanya Bhagavat, please, my Lord, increase our congregation? Do we pray that these very nice gentlemen and ladies who are living outside will come up to a level of Krishna consciousness so they also can sit on the Vyasasana, dressed how they are dressed at home, and preach Krishna consciousness, representing Grihasta independent financial life, but with, amazing Krishna consciousness from the Vyasasana or behind the microphone leading a kirtan? Of course. Prabhupada continues. So there is no objection. Dress is not very important thing. Anyone who does not want to change this dress, that doesn't matter. Prabhupada ki jai. We don't insist. Come like ordinary American gentlemen, there is no objection in that way. 1969. So, if you don't accept this dress, that does not mean you cannot be in Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness can be achieved in any condition of life. It does not matter whether you are dressed in this way or in your American or German way or any way. That does not matter. And listen to this one. Because some devotees insist, Mataji, where's your sari? or Prabhu, where's your dhoti? You've been coming to the temple for like 5 months now. Seriously, we hear this, right? I don't want to criticize anyone, but we hear this type of rhetoric sometimes. Prabhupada says, if you have no objection to accept this dress, that's nice. But even, what is this dress? Prabhupada just says just above, it's saffron, right? But okay, even assuming it's white. If you have no objection, that's nice. But if you have got objection, then we have no objection. Krishna consciousness is different from this dress or that dress. Regarding dress, I have already written to you that dress is immaterial in Krishna consciousness. Consciousness is within. This is in 69. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur sang a song where he sings, listen to this is called the Chaun Baul. He says, this is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's poem. In full knowledge of what is the soul and what is not the soul, wearing the dress of a renunciant within your heart, just make your creeper of prema bloom by sprinkling it with the rainfall of bhajan sadhana. Chaun Baul says, when this occurs, then you will actually become Lord Krishna's servant. So we're already at 9 o'clock, Prabhu. So I suggest that those who want to go take prasadam, and even if everybody goes takes prasadam, you please go ahead. I'm going to take advantage that this video is being recorded. It's going to be a little more difficult with less devotees, but if you give me your blessings, I can just continue. And in this way, you can take prasadam, and I'll just finish these references, which will hopefully just be a reference for anyone who wants to hear, a lot of references about dressing normally or not necessarily having a shika in Krishna consciousness. So please, feel totally free to get up anytime and go take prasadam. It's totally cool. Well, serve or take, anything. So I'll just continue with these verses, with these quotes. In 1969, Prabhupada says, so if you think this kind of dress will attract more people, you can dress yourself in that manner. So he's giving the responsibility to the person. Okay, if you think that, my material life and even my preaching life will be better in Western clothes, fine. (1971). No, that is not our program. That is not our program. We do not ask anyone to change his cloth. Never. I never asked them to change his cloth or change his position. So you see again this tanesittaha, clothes and social position in one sentence. That is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy. Not important. He can have dhoti, you can have pant. It doesn't matter. I was having prasadam at the ISKCON London Soho Temple, Govinda's restaurant one day. I was sitting alone, and 2 young men sat next to me, and they were speaking, and one of them had tulsi, and the other didn't. And we started speaking, and I said, can I sit next to you? So we started speaking. So it was one devotee who was an actor, trying to be an actor, and his friend who's also an actor. And somehow the topic of dress in Krishna consciousness came up. And this devotee's friend, he told me, yeah, you Hare Krishnas, it's just like the Dumbo the elephant. You know the Disney classic from the long time ago, like the flying elephant who flies with his ears? Remember? Dumbo? So I was like, excuse me? He's like, yeah, you Hare Krishnas, it's just like the Dumbo the elephant. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, you know the scene in the cartoon where Dumbo is on top of this burning building, and there's flames everywhere, and he wants to jump, and he thinks that the little feather in his hand, elephants don't have hands, in his trunk, this white feather is what gives him the ability to fly. So I'm sitting, I'm like, okay, yeah. And he says, and so he jumps off, and he's not flying. He's just plummeting to the ground. And then the little mouse, his friend who's on his little red hat, screams, Dumbo, Dumbo, you can let go of the feather. You can fly. You can fly. I was like, okay. And he said, and so Dumbo just opens his ears and starts flying. And I was like, okay, and what? He says, so just like that, you Hare Krishnas, you think your clothes is what makes you so spiritual, but that's not it. Your philosophy, your prayers, that's what makes you so spiritual. And I was like, wow. 1974, Mataji Jyotirmayi, she's French, so she spoke like this. So someone speaking to Prabhupada, she is repeating to Prabhupada, no, he's saying, why we are dressing like this, like Indians? Prabhupada says, I have not said that you dress like that. You like, you dress. Did I say that you do it? A small parenthesis about the term Indian dress. Some devotees get offended sometimes. They hear, how dare you call saris and dhotis Indian dress? It's the dress of the spiritual world. It's Vaikuntha dress. No. And that may be. But Prabhupada, at least in 2 occasions, spoke of these clothes as Indian dress. So if it's okay for Prabhupada to refer to dhotis and saris sometimes as Indian dress, and also maybe sometimes as Vaikuntha angels. We'll get to these nice quotes from Prabhupada, like the pro-dhoti quotes, pro-sari quotes. There's many of them too, and we'll get to them. But my point, if Prabhupada called them sometimes Indian dress, we can also, in 1974, same conversation in Paris, Prabhupada says, these girls, they just left. Hey, Vaishnavis, come back. This is just referring to you. The only time when Prabhupada's talking about women's dress and you leave. Anyway, Prabhupada says, these girls, when they dress in Indian way, they look more beautiful. Right? So, we can argue that Prabhupada liked saris. And it's a fact. We have to be objective. When he came back from India the first time in 1969, he brought saris for the devotees. There's one conversation where he tells us, or a letter, Himavati, he tells her, you can learn from Jadurani how to wear a sari. The girls that should be the standard of our society, something like that, But he also called it Indian dress. And even the dress that Lord Chaitanya wears, he called it Indian dress. In 12 February 1972 in Madras, Prabhupada says, a letter, regarding the Panchatattva deities, the pictures you have sent are very nice. Because they live in Bengal, dhoti, shirt, and chadar are the standard dress. He's like saying, that's how they dress in Bengal, therefore that's how you should dress Lord Chaitanya. Now, we believe that, we accept that there's a Golok Navadvip in the spiritual world. It's also like Navadvip. So it's not like you go back to Lord Chaitanya in the spiritual world and you'll see like some lizards, with some weird clothes. It's Lord Chaitanya. It's the same. When Lord Chaitanya is on earth, it's the same we hear in the spiritual world. Okay. We don't reject that. But Prabhupada did sometimes call it Indian dress. So it's okay to call it Indian dress. That's my simple point. Again in France, or Geneva in Switzerland, sorry for the Swiss devotees, Switzerland, in Geneva, Guru Gauranga tells to Prabhupada, Monsieur le Président is saying that he has been to India and he understands that one dresses like this in India, but why would the disciples dress in America or in Europe in this way? Is it necessary? Prabhupada says, no, it is not necessary. Dress you can have as you like. So remember, it's not Tejas asking this question to Prabhupada, a future brahmachari. It's a president of, he's the governor of the Hôtel de Ville. He's someone who's socially alive, who has money, who has a career, who's in the world. He's asking this question. And so to that person who's a grihasta, Prabhupada's saying, no, dress you can have as you like. Is it? You know the story of Sachinandan Swami's father? You know it. Have you heard of this story? You know the story of Sachinandan Swami's father, maybe. It's in the Prabhupada Memories. If you find it on YouTube. Super famous story. Prabhupada was having a discussion with Sachinanda Swami's father. And Sachinanda Swami's father was quite sort of angry or not so satisfied. And he told Prabhupada, Sachinanda Swami explains, why are you're bringing this, this Krishna consciousness in the way, and he's mentioned dress. In the West, it's like bringing an elephant from the, Amazon River in tropical country and putting this elephant in the freezing cold river Rhine. He will not survive. So he was going on like this, and Prabhupada cut him off and said, you can be Krishna conscious in a suit and tie. And then Sachinanda Swami says that, from that point, Sachinanda Swami's father really liked Prabhupada. Yeah, he's very good. And I mentioned that because just like some time ago, I'm not going to mention when, but there was one devotee here or somewhere else, who was saying, like, it's shocking. How can we even, how can we think of a Hare Krishna in suit and tie? Like, oh my God. And it's like, hello, like Prabhupada said, like, you can be Krishna conscious in a suit and tie. Any questions? I mean, the discussion should stop right there, Sometimes, we and speaking for myself first, we don't take Prabhupada's words seriously. Like when he says something, does he really mean it? I'll give you another example that has to do with education. Ravindra Swarup Prabhu, ex-GBC, former GBC temple president of ISKCON Philadelphia, a grihasta since long time, but a guru in ISKCON, a preacher in ISKCON. And he also has a PhD from Temple University in religion. And he says that when he was finishing his PhD, he realized he couldn't be temple president, because that's what he was, and at the same time finish his studies, finish his PhD. So he wrote to Prabhupada, should I finish my studies, but then I can't be temple president, or should I be temple president? I'll stop my studies, no problem. And Prabhupada wrote back, finish your PhD, anyone can be temple president. Now the interesting part is that even though Prabhupada was showing this letter to devotees in the temple, devotees were telling him, not all of them, but some devotees were saying, nah, Prabhupada is just saying this to you because you're attached. But actually, he wants you to stop your studies and, continue living in the temple. So you have a black and white statement by Prabhupada, like, yeah, go finish your PhD. Black and white, couldn't be more clear. But disciples of Prabhupada saying, no, that's not really what Prabhupada meant. He just said that because you're attached. So similarly, if Prabhupada says, like, you can be Krishna conscious in a suit and tie, I think we should take that very seriously. And what does it mean, Krishna conscious in a suit and tie? Again, as a second-class congregation member who just gives a donation when he's asked to give a donation or washes pots? Or can it be all the way up to a initiating guru, a GBC, temple president? Right? That's a very interesting question to ask. So now we're back in 77, just a few more quotes from 77. But then we got the Bhagavatam and Caitanya-caritāmṛta. In 77, we read this one. I did not say you have adopted, I'll just read it. No, dhoti, I don't say. You have nice coat pant. I don't say that you have to. I never said that. You have adopted it. I never said that you put on dhoti. And now Prabhu's for the last quote from 1977. And this is my favorite quote. Because Prabhupada here is giving the definition of the word grihasta, dress. And it's shocking. Context. Prabhupada heard that one more sannyasi had fallen down. So Prabhupada's angry. God, another scandal, another sannyasi who fell into illicit sex. So listen to what he says. From now, this should be strictly outlawed, no more sannyasis. He did give sannyas from January to November 77, but here he was angry. And he said, no more sannyasis, and those sannyasis who have fallen down, get them married. No more show bottle cheating. Better go and speak philosophy in your grihasta dress, not this dress. You have nice coat, pant, gentlemen. Who says no? Nice coat, pant, gentlemen. That's the definition of grihasta dress. Grihasta dress, not this dress, but you have nice coat, pant, gentlemen. So in 1977, one time at least here, Prabhupada is thinking, okay, grihasta dress, pants, shirt, gentlemen. It's right there. And then he says, who says no? I never said. Rather, I shall be happy or glad to see that up-to-date gentlemen with tilak and shika, so here, he's stressing the shika, are speaking. That is very prestigious everywhere. Why this false dress? And then listen, what is wrong with becoming a grihasta? So it seems that for Prabhupada, a grihasta meant you can wear nice coat, pant. And that relates to the next topic, which is Yukta Vairagya. Who here has heard of the word Yukta Vairagya? Tejas ji. Come on, Yukta Vairagya. So allow me. It's a very important principle that we should really know. Established by Rupa Goswami. Vairagya means renunciation. So there's two types of renunciation according to our tradition. Yukta or Falgu. So Yukta means literally from the word yuj, like connected, correct, appropriate. And Falgu is false renunciation. And so Rupa Goswami gives a definition of Yukta Vairagya is when you accept everything material in the service of the Lord, in the service of Krishna. That's when it becomes real renunciation. You don't renounce something artificially, you use it in the Lord's service. And that's how you actually renounce it, right? That concept was so important for Prabhupada that I heard from Prabhupada disciples who were there, that he asked that there would be a big poster of this verse, Anasyakta sarvishayan yatarham upayunjata nirbando Krishna sambande yuktam vairagyam uchyate. The golden verse of Yukta Vairagya on a poster at the top of the main entrance of the BBT warehouse, where all the books of Prabhupada were stocked in Los Angeles. Right at the entrance, he wanted this verse from Rupa Goswami. Because, he got that from his guru, Bhaktisiddhanta, who used the printing press, right? The Brihat Mridanga. Like he would say that, there's a letter, you can play Mridanga and people will hear it 10, 20 meters, but this Brihat Mridanga, this printing press will be heard all over the world. This is the Yukta, the Brihat Mridanga, the great Mridanga. Same thing today with online preaching, you look at Ananda Krishna's videos or that German devotee in Mayapur who makes these videos about Mayapur. Millions of people watch it. So this notion of utilizing technology in the service of Krishna, right? Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used a car. Like he was one of the first people in India to use a car. And he was a sannyasi. Think about it. A sannyasi who, as we see, kind of restrained, has to have a uniform, Bhaktisiddhanta, the sannyasi, drove a car. And where did he drive the car to? Radhakund. He drove to Radhakund with a car, for God's sakes. It's amazing, Yukta Vairagya. He was one of the first people in India to wear a wristwatch, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But then the question is, okay, that, sannyasi Vaishnavas using printing press to preach Krishna consciousness, like Bhaktisiddhanta, like Prabhupada. Prabhupada traveled in airplanes. He told Hridayananda Maharaj, should I be such a fool and imitate Lord Chaitanya and walk barefoot? He used jumbo jets, and that's how he traveled 14 times around the world, and that's how we're chanting Hare Krishna today, right? But what about dress? What about regular dress that a grihasta uses? Is that not Yukta Vairagya? Listen to this statement by Bhaktisiddhanta. If one is so expert that he can engage everything or dovetail everything in the service of the Lord, to give up the material world would be a great blunder. One should learn how to dovetail everything in the service of the Lord, for everything is connected to Krishna. That is the real purpose of life and secret of success. Right? My hero and friend Raghunath Prabhu, from Wisdom of the Sages podcast, he told me once, devotional clothes means any clothes I use to serve Krishna. Yukta Vairagya, right? Especially the householder who we see doesn't have a must uniform. But sometimes, and I don't want to insult anyone, but sometimes we have, like Superman. What was like the Superman is his one enemy was kryptonite. Like he's super powerful, but kryptonite, right? And so, I say this, it seems like sometimes, things like pants are like the kryptonite of ISKCON or the kryptonite of Yukta Vairagya. Like, we'll engage everything in Krishna consciousness. Can grihastas, wear pants to lead a kirtan or to speak about Krishna? No. It's kryptonite, And, So continuing again, you can get up anytime you like. Prasadam is ready, and please. I want to quote two purports now about time and place and circumstance. Another important concept related to Yukta Vairagya. This notion of there's principles and then there's details of time, place, and circumstance. Right? Prabhupada says this in one purport. To broadcast the cult of Krishna consciousness, one has to learn renunciation in terms of country, time, and candidate. A candidate for Krishna consciousness in the Western countries should be taught about the renunciation of material existence, but one would teach candidates from a country like India in a different way. The teacher has to consider time, candidate, and country. He must avoid the principle of he must try to avoid the principle of niyamagraha, which means he should not try to perform the impossible. What is possible in one country may not be possible in another. The Acharya's duty is to accept the essence of devotional service. There may be a little change here and there as far as Yukta Vairagya. Dry renunciation is forbidden by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this false renunciation. And we have also learned this from our spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The essence of devotional service must be taken into consideration, not the outward paraphernalia. And here's another one. This one is actually relating to deity worship. Can you imagine? This is a quote just about Pancharatrika. You see, I've been dealing with Bhagavat Marg. But here's actually a quote about worshiping the deity. And even for deity worship, time, place, and circumstance is to be considered. In the 4th canto, chapter 8, verse 54, purport, Prabhupada says, the method of worship, chanting the mantra and preparing the form of the Lord, is not stereotyped. It is especially mentioned in this verse that we should take consideration of time, place, and available conveniences. Our Krishna consciousness movement is going on throughout the entire world, and we also install deities in different centers. Sometimes our Indian friends, puffed up with concocted notions. So this is Prabhupada. He's an Indian, and he's saying this about other Indians. Difference is Prabhupada's a pure devotee. Criticize by saying, this has not been done, that has not been done. But they forget the instruction of Narada Muni to one of the greatest Vaishnavas, Dhruva Maharaj. One has to consider the particular time, country, and conveniences. What is convenient in India may not be convenient in the Western countries. Those who are actually in the line of Acaryas, or who personally have no knowledge of how to act in the role of Acharya, unnecessarily criticize the activities of the ISKCON movement in countries outside of India. The fact is that such critics cannot do anything personally to spread Krishna consciousness. And he finishes with this really cool sentence. If someone does go and preach, taking all risks and allowing all considerations for time and place, it might be that there are changes in the manner of worship, but that is not at all faulty according to Shastra. So like Prabhupada said, the Krishna consciousness movement is not stereotyped or stagnant. Historians of religion say that many times the first generation or two after a very charismatic founder tend to be more conservative, more reactionary than the founder. For example, it happened with Christianity. Jesus spoke of he didn't really speak so much of himself as God, but there came this very strong push. No, Jesus is God. Jesus is God. Buddha also. Buddha, just didn't really speak about the soul, right? He avoided the topic. But then, one of the early generations of Buddhism, had this very, very strong, no, there is no soul, there is no God, mood. And so we can ask the question, and that's what they're saying, to be more Catholic than the Pope, right? And so the question that comes up is, to be more Vedic than Prabhupada. Like I'll read to you something that happened in Los Angeles. This is spoken by Garga Muni Prabhu. He's describing the temple room in Los Angeles, which used to be an old church with, how do you say in German? Pews? Like where the men and women sit to listen to the pastor speaking. The bunk, yeah? The bench. So he said, the temple room in Los Angeles now was not what Prabhupada wanted the temple room to be. Prabhupada had another idea, and that was not our vision. His vision was to have mainstream America come in with their shoes on and sit in the pews and hear Bhagavad Gita and Kirtan on the stage. We put Prabhupada on the stage, and he had Vishnujan Swami play the organ. Pastor stands and preach, which shows that, the point is whether you're sitting on the floor or under a tree or on the Vyasasana or on a chair, the point is to transmit knowledge about Krishna. That's the point. And whether the audience is sitting on the pews or sitting on the floor, the point is to receive knowledge. That's the point. And whether you're playing harmonium or a Christian church organ, the point is to hear and chant holy name of Krishna. And Prabhupada was totally cool with that. And so Garga Muni continues, listen, Prabhupada did not want the stained glass windows removed. Like these stained glass windows. He did not want them removed. Don't touch anything, he said. Even the pulpit, he kept that. It was so surreal to sit in the pews and hear Bhagavad Gita and Vishnujan Swami singing Jai Radha Madhava on the organ. Even Prabhupada would play the organ. Prabhupada said, they are inclined to come to church, so let them come to this church, but hear Bhagavad Gita and Kirtan. Prabhupada was thinking mainstream America, not hippies. Prabhupada's vision was not that we all become monks. He wanted judges, politicians, doctors to come to the temple. They were not going to become monks and shave up. But we had another vision. Come to the temple and shave up. A couple of weeks ago, there was a photograph of the mayor of New York City who came to visit the Bhakti Center. And the temple president there is in pants, but he's a temple president. You see, that's why that liminal position of the temple president, it can go both ways, I think. And you see that, of course, you know, the mayor is dressed in his suit, but you see he feels comfortable. Of course, you know, the ex-prime minister or some very important person in England came to the Bhaktivedanta Manor, and everyone was wearing a dhoti, and he also. So, you know, there's not only one way, and that's my point. There's many ways to represent Krishna consciousness, and they should be, you know, okay. Let's very briefly speak about the Srimad Bhagavatam. The actual verses. What does the Bhagavatam say about dress? Because ultimately, you know, Prabhupada refers us to the Bhagavatam. Bhaktisiddhanta refers us to the Bhagavatam. All our Acaryas refer us to the Bhagavatam. Mahaprabhu, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu refers us to the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is our ultimate authority. Right? The Amala Purana, the spotless, clean Purana. Out of the 14,000 verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam, we often hear Prabhupada say there's 18,000 verses, but if you actually do a count, there's approximately 14,000, at least from the Bhagavatam that we got from Prabhupada. Out of the 14,000 verses, there's there's 3 verses that talk about how to dress. Prescriptive verses, not descriptive. There's many verses describing how Vishnu is dressed, you know, in the 3rd canto, how Krishna is dressed in the 10th canto, in Vrindavan, how the gopis are dressed. There's one verse that says the gopis have a belt, by the way, which is strange because how can you wear a sari and a belt at the same time? But anyway, it's mentioned that the gopis have a belt, right? So these are descriptive verses. But there's prescriptive verses like you must dress like this or that. Prabhus, there's 3 of them. Out of 14,000 verses, there's 3 of them, and they're not even referring to how a Vaishnava should dress, but they're instructions on how a brahmachari, a vanaprastha, and a grihastha should dress. But remember, Vaishnavas are not the only ones who have brahmacharis. There's many brahmachari mayavadis. There's many, you know, grihastha. Grihastha doesn't mean Vaishnava. Brahmachari doesn't mean Vaishnava. You know, there's Mayavadi sannyasis. There's Vaishnava sannyasis. So the 3 only verses in the Bhagavatam that talk about dressing are verses that talk about ashram rules. Not about bhakti. Not about devotion to Krishna, which is the essence of the Bhagavatam. So you divide 3 by 14,000 and you get 0.0002%. 0.0002% of the Srimad Bhagavatam is about how devotees should dress. And on top of that, the speaker of the Srimad Bhagavatam is naked. And then remember all these verses, all these quotes from Prabhupada. I was speaking about this staying in your position. Prabhupada said so many, stay in your position, you can stay in your position. This is the famous Stanistitaha principle, which is found in Canto 10, chapter 14, verse number 3. And that verse is Jnane prayasam udapasyanamanta eva jivan tisam mukaritam bhavadiya varta stanistitaha shruti-gatam tanuvan manobir ye prayasho jitadisyotaisi trilokyam. And the second line of this verse is stanistitaha. And the verse is basically saying, while remaining in your situation, if you listen with submission to the message of the Lord, you can conquer the Lord, who otherwise is unconquerable. You like it? Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? But what's really interesting in this verse is these two words, stanistitaha, while remaining in your situation, not changing anything. So who is in a situation? Someone who's socially alive. Someone who's socially dead is not in any established situation. And Prabhupada describes sannyasis as being socially dead. But grihastas, they have their job, their career, they pay their taxes, they've got their husbands, their wives, their children, families, and their dress. And so the Bhagavatam and Prabhupada, we saw, I'm not inventing this, 2 or 3 times we saw Prabhupada combining in one sentence dress and position. They're the same. Dress is part of external culture. And the external culture in which you're in at a particular given time, that's your established situation. The Bhagavatam says, while remaining in that situation, you can become a pure devotee. You can conquer God, who otherwise is unconquerable. It's beautiful. Lord Chaitanya exemplified this in his own life when he was a grihasta and when he spoke to Raghunath Das. When he was a grihasta, you see, when he joined the Hare Krishna movement, we learned that he spent his first maybe 20 years pretending to not be a devotee. He was just an arrogant scholar, right? And no one could understand, this is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Vaishnavas like Advaita Acharya, Srivas Thakur were getting together and doing kirtan, and they loved Nimai because, they're attracted to him. They're pure devotees. He's the Supreme Lord. I'm going too fast, huh? I'm sorry. The point is, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was attracting everybody, but he was hiding his identity. And then he meets his guru, and then he becomes a devotee. He's married at the time. And so you look at the way Lord Chaitanya dresses, or his established situation, before becoming a devotee and after becoming a devotee. It's the same. He doesn't change anything. He doesn't shave his head. He doesn't change. He's dressed like a Brahmin or like any person in Navadvip. Like Prabhupada says, right? It's in Bengal. They wear dhotis. He's dressed like that. He meets devotees. Oh my God, okay, I'm a devotee now. I laugh because, he's Krishna, we believe. So it's kind of funny that he would play this Leela. It's a charming Leela. But externally, he becomes a devotee and he does not change anything externally. Maybe he starts wearing tilak. Okay, maybe before he didn't have tilak, now he has tilak, right? As a matter of fact, he preaches to his students. After he becomes a devotee, he tells his students, no, go home and come back without tilak. I don't want to teach you. But he wears the same clothes that everybody else in that area is wearing. And that whole area is not Vaishnavas. The Vaishnavas in Navadvip are a small number at that time. And they're persecuted even. Right? And yet, the Vaishnavas do not distinguish themselves from the rest of society by their dress. The Grihastas. The Grihasta Vaishnavas of Navadvip dress exactly like the meat-eating, smarta, demigod worshippers, non-Vaishnavas of the area. And finally, to Raghunath Das, Lord Chaitanya tells him, before Raghunath takes sannyas, when he's still a married man, he says, don't be a false renunciate. Go home, practice your Krishna consciousness internally, so much so that even people will not detect your Krishna consciousness from outside. These are words from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, God himself, to Raghunath Das before he takes sannyas. So you can see there's this line from the Bhagavatam, stanistitaha, remaining in your established social situation. You have the paradigmatic example of a Vaishnava, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, showing the example of not changing anything when he becomes a devotee, at least externally. Of course, he accepts, the chanting, the reading, the hearing and chanting, the worshipping Vishnu and so on, but at least in terms of externals, he doesn't change. He doesn't even shave his head. And then his associates, the Grihastha associates of Navadvip also, Pundarik Vidyanidhi, Kolavich or Sridhar, Srivas Thakur, they're all dressed like everybody else is in society, whether they're rich or poor. There's different varieties, but there's no radical. And it comes back to this statement by Hridayananda Maharaj, which I liked so much at the beginning. I mentioned, that there's no evidence that when people converted to Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, that it's not that like, oh, you guys are going Harinam. Wait for me 5 seconds. I'm going to go change in my devotional clothes. I'll be right back. Right? They were like, in their situation, the Harinam's going, they go on the Harinam. Period. We got about 2 or 3 more points. But I don't know if are you okay? You want to stop? Prabhus, continue. Okay, please feel free to stop, huh? Honestly, So this model, I believe, of practicing Krishna consciousness in Western clothes, in normal local clothes, it looks like it's legitimate. And I think it will become more and more prominent as the years go by, because of this principle of water, seeking its own level. Remember, like all those brahmacharis in the Radha Damodar temple, Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party. At one point they're like, oh, well, our scriptures say we can get married and also stay preachers or Krishna conscious and go back to Godhead as fast as a brahmachari or a sannyasi. Yeah, I want a little bit of physical, romantic intimacy. I want, some children. I want a career. I want my own house. And if I can get the same result with that, of course I'll take it, right? Because it's allowed. It's within the parameter of what our scriptures say. So similarly, if Grihasta's dressing in normal clothes is within the parameter of what's allowed, I think sooner or later devotees will be like, well, okay, yeah, why not? If I can be comfortable. And we have examples of that, leaders, Grihasta leaders who have that mode. Like in America, we have Raghunath Prabhu and Kostuba, who have this very, very popular podcast. And, Kostuba Prabhu gives class at the Bhakti Center in pants and shirt. No one says anything. Sada Shiva Prabhu, he's still temple president of ISKCON Berlin. I remember I went to a Janmashtami festival there, and it was hot. It was in the middle of the summer, and he was in very nice, clean Bermuda shorts and his beard and a T-shirt. But he's a Grihasta, and he's temple president. And he was like, welcome everybody to ISKCON Berlin. And I was like, wow, yes, because I think this is legitimate, and I think it also can work with attracting people. We have Gadadhar Prabhu, the first disciple of Sachin Swami. Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu in near Frankfurt, he does his program like that. The Loft program in New Zealand, the Bhakti Hub in Belgrade, the Yoga Lyrique in Paris. So we see more and more that model becoming prominent. And I think it's good because some people really love seeing the traditional Indian clothes. And many devotees feel also very good wearing those clothes. And that's perfectly fine. But some people don't. Some people like. Some people don't. Like Prabhupada said, right? Vedic dress makes one look very beautiful. It seems like this dress, this dhoti, at least the dhoti, the sari, is much more close to what Krishna wears in the spiritual world. You know, there's even one letter where Prabhupada says, do you think Krishna wears coat pant? Right? And, you know, Prabhupada sometimes emphasized it. You know, when I see, he used the word saffron again, but he says, when I see brahmachari, or devotee, yeah, I think he used the word brahmacharis anyway. Devotees in saffron robes with shaved head, they look like Vaikuntha angels. Vaikuntha angels, he says. Right? There's one devotee he played a joke with. I can identify with this devotee because this devotee didn't like wearing dhotis very much. And so he asked Prabhupada about this, and Prabhupada said to him, Ram Roy, his name, the early Ram Roy. Prabhupada said, I'm sure there is a Vaikuntha planet where they wear pants that you can go to, don't worry. You know. There's one devotee in this temple, like in the last few days, one devotee told me, you know, when I wear a dhoti, I feel, you know, I really feel like a devotee. I really feel Krishna conscious. Okay. And in this very same temple, one Vaishnavi told me, you know, the more I advance in Krishna consciousness, the less I want to wear a sari. You know. So it seems like also the reception is different with different people. You know, some people, when they see, you know, dhotis and saris, they're like, oh my God, right? Like, for example, I have a friend in Brazil, and his teacher, his brother is a school teacher. And he was teaching a class of 10-year-old kids. And he asked them, okay, write down what would be the 3 things you would do if you had a lot of money. And one 10-year-old girl, she wrote, if I had a lot of money, I would help the poor people, especially the ones who are selling the books in the bus because they always look dressed like beggars. Right? Talking about, you know, the brahmacharis. I'll tell you one anecdote. Now again, this is not a dhoti bashing story because we have to admit that, you know, the traditional Indian way to dress or the Vaikuntha dress also has amazing benefits. But let me finish this one anecdote. I was at the Laguna Beach temple before a Sunday kirtan, and a young Christian guy came. I know he's Christian because he told me he was with a group of friends, teenagers, 17-year-old. Laguna Beach is kind of an expensive upper middle class city. Prabhupada said, fallen yogis take birth in Laguna Beach. Interesting, he said that. But that's besides the point. So this boy called John, we started speaking, and he told me, listen, I'm a Christian, okay? I belong to Hillsong Church, and I'm very happy as a Christian. I don't want to convert to your religion, okay? And I said, fine. So he relaxed a little bit, and then he said, so what's up with the dress? Because at that time, devotees were starting to come for the kirtan, and some were dressed in dhotis and saris, some were dressed in pants and shirt. And so he asked, like, what's up with the dress? And so I said, well, that's an interesting question. In my church, there seems to be 2 opinions. You know, one say that, you know, we should wear these because it's more pleasing to God and to our founder. And others say that, no, it's, you know, the marking, the tilak, and this is really important, but the dress is not important. And then he said this. John said this to me. 17-year-old, you know, religious guy, pious, intelligent, Christian. He said, wow, if I had to dress like Jesus Christ dressed 2,000 years ago in order to be a member of my church today, I would never be a member of my church. When he said that, I was like, wow, you know, kind of like the Dumbo story reaction, like, wow, you know. And, you know, many leaders also feel the pressure. Like I heard Mahatma Prabhu, I heard from reliable sources that, you know, Mahatma Prabhu, you know, this Grihastha guru in ISKCON, he wants to, you know, be in normal Western clothes a lot more, even in, you know, ISKCON functions, but he feels this pressure and that's why he does it less. Now, a lot of people also, like I said, a lot of devotees who like to wear the Vaikuntha dress, the traditional Indian dress, and that's fantastic. We should accept everything that's favorable for our Krishna consciousness. And a lot of people also like, a lot of people like, wow, it's so beautiful, it's so colorful, and I'm so attracted to the dress. That's also a fact. I mean, we could claim that if it was not for a dhoti, there would be no Krishna consciousness in all of Russia today. I'll say it again. If it wasn't for a dhoti, we could say that there would be no Krishna consciousness in Russia today. Or maybe there would be, but it would be a totally different story. Why? Because we remember that Prabhupada was in Moscow. He had a few hours before going, or one day before leaving, and Shyamasundar Prabhu went to look for some milk, and he was wearing his dhoti. And across the street was a young Russian man. I forget his name, the first devotee in Russia. I forget his name, I'm sorry. Anatoly. And his Indian friend, who was the son of the Indian ambassador. And the Indian sons, we should remember it, it was the Indian son, the Indian boy, who saw Shyamasundar in a dhoti, and he was like, what is this? Let's go. And he said to Anatoly, let's go. And they crossed the street, and they spoke to Shyamasundar, and Shyamasundar was like, I have my spiritual master here, come and meet him. And Prabhupada discharged, maha mercy on him for those few hours, and the next morning gave him initiation, and then went to the airport and left. But, if it wasn't for that dhoti that Shyamasundar was wearing, they would have walked by, and who knows when Krishna consciousness would have gone to Russia. Right? So, what's the solution? And I'm coming to the end here, because devotees are shocked that it's lasting so long. Thank you. What's the solution? Well, the solution, it seems like we should allow different expressions of bhakti. So that more, our objective, we're missionaries. We want the Sankirtan movement to spread. So if there's different models of Krishna consciousness that are accepted and respected and not judged and not marginalized in both ways, then more people come. It's just like if you have a menu in the restaurant, if you have only 10 items, but if you have 50 items, you'll probably get more customers, right? And that's why Prabhupada talked about, a house in which the whole world can live. A house in which the whole world can live, Govinda Dev Prabhu was not here, but I have to really glorify him, because he told one devotee, he said, look, here in Simhachalam we're a traditional temple, and you can see Govinda Dev Prabhu, by his own style, he really likes to wear traditional South Indian style clothes. Maybe we could stop that, huh? He likes to wear, traditional South Indian clothes, and he looks fantastic in it, right? But he said, look, I don't want this temple to enforce a monolithic standard. I don't want this temple to be a monolithic standard, Only one style, force, And I think that's brilliant. That's a brilliant type of management, where you can really establish a house in which the whole world can live. Because ultimately, devotees have different opinions, Maybe it would be good to stop it, or is it possible to? Oh, it's a phone, or what is that? Hare Krishna? Oh, it's a phone. Let me read this in a lecture about individual opinion. Listen, Prabhupada says, we are all person. You are person. I am person. We are all individual. I have got my individual opinion. You have got your individual opinion. Oneness means when these individual opinions are coincided in the matter of surrendering to Krishna. That is oneness. Oneness does not mean that all these individuals become one. No, they keep their individuality, but they become one in the service of Krishna. That is oneness. That is Krishna consciousness. So the conclusion, Prabhus. Don't, if you're a temple president watching this, or a leader, or a senior devotee, or any devotee, don't judge. Because judging others is a really, really, really dangerous thing. As a matter of fact, when you judge others, you develop a mentality from hell. Right? There's this statement from the Padma Purana that one who sees the deity as stone, one who sees the guru as an ordinary person, one who sees the Vaishnava coming from a particular type of jati or, caste, has a hellish mentality. Hellish mentality. Right? And so when you have a hellish mentality, then what happens? You're not happy. You create a hellish atmosphere around you. And you lose members. And you lose potential members too. Paramshraya Prabhu, who tells me the story. You know Paramshraya Prabhu? He told me the story of how there was one friend of his that his father owned a big store where they sell very fancy clothes. Mataji, do you mind chanting a little softer? We'll be finished soon. Thank you. Dankeschön. And it was before Janmashtami, this devotee who was the son of this man who had this big store, he thought, I'm going to take a brand new suit for Janmashtami and I'm going to wear it for Krishna's birthday. You know that story? And so he wore this suit with this feeling, I'm coming for, this is the best that my family, $500, this is the best suit that my family, that I can offer to Krishna on his birthday. And he came to the temple and they criticized him, where's your devotee? This is Janmashtami. He was so disgusted that he left. He left Krishna consciousness. When Madhya-līlā Swami fell down, devotees started speaking all around ISKCON, Madhya-līlā Swami fell down, Madhya-līlā Swami fell down. And Prabhupada became very angry and said, you have made it impossible for my son to return. Right? So don't judge. And it goes both ways, If you like to wear Western clothes, don't start judging those who like to wear dhotis and saris. Because that's just as bad. Look at this devotee. He's a grihasta, but he has a bald head and a shika. That must be artificial renunciation. He thinks he's better because he doesn't have stitched cloth. Hellish mentality. Hellish mentality. But same other way. This guy has hair, he doesn't have a shika. Second-class citizen. He must not be serious about his sadhana. Also hellish mentality. So rather you should think, how can we increase our congregation? How can we empower our congregation? Just like Srivas Thakur in Chaitanya Bhagavati says, my Lord, please increase our congregation. You have to somehow meditate on how to create, because here in Germany, it's literally a question about creating almost a congregation of not just second-class, devotees who come to the temple and give a donation, and those who are temple president, brahmacharis and sannyasis in the temple, or, the temple devotees are the stars and the control. It's not the Catholic Church model, remember. It's not the Catholic Church model. The model is, kiba vipra kibanyasi shudra kanenoi. Whether you're a grihasta or a sannyasi or this or that, if you know Krishna, you're a guru. That's our tradition. So think like that. Think how to empower your congregation members. See them as potential preachers, potential representatives, and give them the facility in the temple room, on the Vyasasana, or behind the microphone to represent Krishna consciousness to other people in society who 99% of them are grihastas, married anyway. So they can show by their own example what it means to be a fixed up grihasta. yeah, don't judge. And with that result, you know, if we can somehow be broad-minded and, you know, focus on principles, you know, the 4 regulative principles, the mode of goodness, knowing Prabhupada's books well, you know, having a good sadhana, having a good behavior towards other Vaishnavas, having a service attitude, being loyal to Prabhupada, even being loyal to the, you know, Prabhupada's institutional structure, the GBC. I mean, that you know, we could say is we should, you know, because Bhaktisiddhanta said religious institutions are necessary evils. They're necessary evils. Huh? A religious institution. Yeah, so, you know, we don't spit on the authority structure that Prabhupada gave us. But the point is we should really focus on principles and not finding faults in others. And I think if we have this, you know, mood of encouraging others, especially however externally they may be, and especially if that external is within the mode of goodness, whether very traditional Vaishnava Indian or whether very Western, we should be encouraging to others. And I think if we do that, then, you know, we will manifest this house in which the whole world can live that Prabhupada talked about, and we will be a wonderful example to non-devotees, and they can come and practice Krishna consciousness in whatever style they feel comfortable with. And in that way, we'll be, you know, very good instruments in the hands of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jai. Thank you so much for your patience. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nishingadevi Bhagavan ki jai, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. Hari Hari Bo. Om Tat Sat.